In this video, we're going to talk about psychedelic ego. And I laugh because I am guilty of psychedelic ego, and especially in the early stages of experimenting with psychedelics. And I'll explain to you exactly what the psychedelic ego is and how it forms, and just to be aware of it. First of all, ego. What is ego? Ego is thought. If you're thinking in your ego. So in a way, you can't escape your ego. Ego is your identity. If this is a video game, which it is, then the ego is your separate identity. So that's your identification card. You know, you have a card, it shows like you're a citizen or a passport. You get a passport number and you have a license plate or a license, driver's license, right? And it has like your driver license number, your birth of date. All of these are identifications that are saying this is the separate entity in this video game, and we give it a name and we give it an identification number and a passport, blah, 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 right? So as long as we're thinking, we're in our ego. So everybody's got an ego. And as you can see, looks like you're gonna have to learn how to live with it, because we are thinking beings. Human beings are symbolic, linguistic thinking beings, and it's part of nature. It seems that the evolution in nature, we're on the planet the most evolved, and we are able to put systems together, and we have like these abstract concepts, and we bring things out of the ether and manifest them into reality. So that's all using our ego. Our ego is just more developed than, say, dogs or cats. They all have an ego. They still have a sense of self, sense of separate self, but for us it's more developed, if you will. So that's ego, and it seems like you're just gonna have to learn how to live with it. And I really would like to make a separate video talking more about ego, deconstructing, breaking down what the ego is. So in other words, briefly, you know, if I had to put this in short words, ego equals storylines. Storylines you have, thoughts you have about who you are and what you think of the world, you know, is ego. So this is why brilliantly, the first line of the Tao that can be spoken, is not the eternal Tao. It's not the true Tao, because you profaned it. The minute you spoke it, all my videos are profanity. All my videos, all of me speaking, I'm profaning the sacred. I'm like a finger pointing to the moon in these words. But you've got to experience the moon. See, what I'm talking about here, none of it really helps you much if you don't apply, practice, meditate, do these things, experience these things. If you're into psychedelics, you experience psychedelics in a sacred, ceremonial type approach to it. You see? Proper set, proper setting, you get to experience the Tao, which is, again, it can't be spoken. Now we're just pointing, you know, fingers pointing to the moon. So, as you can see, because ego is just part of being a human being, then it can really come in sneaky ways, because you do psychedelics, you experience enlightenment, different stages of enlightenment. In these experiences, you come back from them and you say, wow, I'm like, my consciousness is higher now. See, again, anytime you compare that, the predicament of the ego is, so as long as you're thinking, you're bound to your ego. And the ultimate state is empty, no mind. In Buddhism, in Zen Buddhism, it's called the no mind state. Emptiness, that's the ultimate state. And that's why these monks spend 20, 30, 40 years, they spend all their life meditating, because they're trying to get to this emptiness, no mind, no ego, right? And there's not even much to be said in those states. I've experienced states like that when I took psychedelics and just sat in nature, meditated for 4 or 5 hours. I literally felt like I was nobody. It was just like, I became no one, really, but now I'm speaking to you through the camera, and it's there, the ego's there. So what happens, the psychedelic ego, is creeps back on you and says, hey, you're kind of an enlightened fella now. You know, you're higher consciousness. I mean, look at the rest of society. They're operating at a lower consciousness. They, you know, you're now playing this game of enlightenment, right? And you're more enlightened than this person, but you're less enlightened than that person. And then this is where the psychedelic ego really creeps in. It's like how many grams of mushrooms did you take? You know, like, bro, I took 7 grams of mushrooms, bro. Can you beat that, bro? And like, you don't really say, can you beat that? But like, that's kind of what you're implying. Like, you're implying that you're some kind of a badass for taking 6 grams of mushrooms, 7 grams of mushrooms, 4 tabs of acid. So it becomes, it becomes all over again, just on a higher level, a dick measuring contest, a penis measuring contest. Like, hey, check it out. You know, you know, that's what it is. You know, I've done 10 grams of mushrooms. Hey, you better not fuck with me. I'm enlightened as fuck right now. 10 grams. Can you 10 grams? How many did you do? 2 grams, 3 grams? Okay. You know, come back when you do 5, and then we can talk. And I say I'm guilty of this, and as you can see, I have a smile on my face the whole time, because how cute, just how cute. I look at myself and I say, how cute, Saeed, how cute, how naive, how cute, you know, because it's absurd. It's absurd. It really is absurd, okay? It's absurd, but we have this tendency to always want to compare ourselves and compare our progress to others. Truth of the matter is, we are all on the different stages to the journey back home, which we call enlightenment, which we call nirvana, which we call mukti, which we call fina. Truth is, we're all on that. That's the truth. If you're gonna see this objectively, that's what's happening. So, along the journey, ego pops in, because, you know, it's ego's part of nature, and says, oh, how far are you on the journey? And you start to kind of look around, you compare yourself. And by the way, that can be useful. That can be useful, because, you know, you look at a self-realized being, and then you say, wow, you compare yourself to that. You're using your ego, you see, and you say, oh, that's where I'm heading. I'm gonna become that self-realized being. So it kind of is useful. It puts things into perspective for you. You see where you are on the cosmic journey. You see where you are in terms of the evolution of your consciousness. That's the usefulness of it. And that's when you're just objectively looking at things. But then when you get into the subjective aspect of it, and you start to compare yourself and feel the sense of superiority, that, hey, like, I had more psychedelic trips, and I did more than XYZ than my friend. You know, so I feel like I'm better than him. I'm gonna tell him how it is. I'm gonna lay down the law for him. I'm gonna tell him, hey, you know, like, that's how you do mushrooms, and this is how you get enlightened, and blah, 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 blah. Right? That sense of superiority is where the ego becomes problematic. Otherwise, it's just a useful tool to recognize where you are on this journey going back home. And just recognizing that, hey, you know, there's still a lot of work to do here, and always better to look up the ladder in the game than look down. Look up, see the people that clearly they've been working longer on their state of consciousness, and they're clearly operating at a higher level, and just look in awe, and, you know, in totally objective terms, and say, well, I guess I'm heading over there, so let's keep working on what I gotta do now to get there. See, that's where the ego is useful. It's a useful tool to just keep things in perspective, keep you looking at yourself objectively. If you're looking at it from the observer's point of view, it's not a problem. The ego here, the psychedelic ego, it's not a problem. The spiritual ego, not a problem. Not a problem. Useful, all useful. The problem becomes when you get subjective into it, and you attach emotions to it, and you just start this, you know, because your ego, your mind, it's very tricky. It wants to feel like it's accomplishing something, when the truth of it, we're all programmed God just forgot itself in the game and programmed all these subjective manifestations of it to come back home. So whether you like it or not, you're gonna get enlightened one lifetime or another. The truth of that's the process, where the process is just doing its thing. It's doing its thing. So you're not doing anything. Your mind isn't doing anything. You're not doing anything to get enlightened. Enlightenment just is happening through you. It's just, that's the way it is. We're all wired for evolution of consciousness. Everything is wired for evolution of consciousness. So the mind, the ego, the way it gets rewarded, the way your mind is rewarded is through creating problems and accomplishing tasks and accomplishment. The ego loves accomplishment. So the ego wants to feel like I'm accomplishing enlightenment. I am doing good work to be enlightened. You know, and so that's where it gets tricky, because then you feel a sense of superiority and you get into the whole comparing how many grams do you take, how many grams. You know how many heroic doses I have? I have like 10 heroic doses on my belt. How many? And it's like, you don't necessarily say it in that sort of way, but that's your intention. And so the intention shows when you're, say, speaking to your friends or whatever. You may not say it like, how many heroic doses do you have, but just the intention, because that's how you feel inside. Inside, your subjective emotions are attached to your new self identity as the heroic dose guy. Okay? So all things that I am guilty of and have been guilty of more in the early, more naive stages of experimenting with psychedelics. The cuter phases, I call them. Okay? So I think the moral of the story is watch it objectively. Watch the whole process of evolution objectively. And if you keep objective, you're just a watcher, you're an observer. You're watching evolution happen through you. You're watching evolution happen through everybody. You watch the whole scene, you're all of it anyway. You're the one experiencing stuff subjectively, and you watch. You know, it's not a denial. You might see somebody who is like harming people with their words. Clearly, objectively, that person is operating at a lower stage of their evolution. Now, are you just gonna be like, oh no, I'm just not gonna compare myself to you know, I'm gonna ignore that they're doing all this. No. You're smart enough to look and see objectively and have empathy and have compassion and say, oh, okay, God in that form at the moment is in the early stages of evolution. And that's why they're doing all these things and harming people with their words. Compassion, that's what compassion is. But you don't like feel a sense of superiority. See? Because I think the reason why the ego evolved in this game is to keep things in perspective for us, for consciousness, while it's on the path. So I find it very useful to look up to the Buddha, to look up to Jesus, to look up to these enlightened beings, Lao Tzu. I find it that using my ego to compare where I am in the journey to where Jesus is, where Buddha is, I find it quite useful. And objectively, then I can look at myself objectively and say, okay, Saeed, you still gotta work on this, you gotta work on that, you know, you've gotta be more compassionate in this scenario, etc., etc., etc. See? Useful. Ego is useful. But where it becomes an enemy, where it becomes detriment, when it becomes heavy load on you, is when you begin to become subjective in your use of the ego and attach emotions and compare, right? So be careful. It's a very tricky thing, because we have to deal with this ego so as long as we're here. So as long as we're symbolic, linguistic, thinking beings, we've got to deal with this ego. We've got to make friends with it. We've got to make buddies with it. And the best way I see is to just try the more and more develop the watcher in you, the observer, not the judger. You know, we've got to go past good and evil. We've got to go beyond good and evil. We've got to go beyond the morality, beyond the duality of light and dark, beyond the duality of good and evil. And we've got to just see that this is just a game playing itself out. And you, the subjective manifestation of God, happens to be in a certain stage in the game. Use your ego, put things into perspective, see where you are in the game, and keep moving forward. Don't compare. It's best not to even look and say, oh, that person is there, that person is there. Just work on you. Just focus. Look up. See where these beings are. The Buddha, Jesus, Krishna, Lao Tzu, Rumi. And be like, wow. Read their poetry, read their books, and be like, okay, I guess that's where I'm going. Let's do that then. That's a more useful way of looking at it. And anybody that clearly demonstrates behavior that is vibrating at a lower vibration, have compassion. Because they're just simply like, they haven't been playing the game for very long. I mean, try and play like, I played Call of Duty the other day, and I got my ass handed to me. You know, but after like 5 games, I was starting to get better. Well, in the first game, 2, 3, 4, like I'm a beginner. So like what? What do you want me to do? I gotta get used to the game. So when we look at our brothers and sisters that are clearly demonstrating lower states of consciousness through their actions and behavior, compassion. They're getting used to the game. That's all. Okay? So that's about it, guys. God bless you all. If you're interested in this stuff, I wrote a mini report, 11 pages, called 7 Pillars of Enlightenment. If you want to download it, it's for free. So I leave a comment for it in the description and in the comments as well. It's like my own little cute way of developing a system, if you will, to keep myself accountable for all these things and keep befriending my ego and be mindful of what's happening and work towards the higher states of consciousness day by day. And I find compassion to be such a recurring theme, having compassion. You know, in Buddhism, the 2 biggest virtues are wisdom and compassion. Wisdom and compassion. You hear this a lot if you get into Buddhism. Wisdom and compassion. Wisdom and compassion. So the wisdom is seeing how the game is, seeing all of this, and then the compassion is, again, practicing compassion and empathy towards yourself, because everybody is you, including the darkest mass murderers. That's just you who just started playing the game very recently and they're completely lost and they're out of their mind, and you know. So that's about it. So check it out, 7 Pillars of Enlightenment. That's it. Until next time. May the Tao be with you.